Star Wars hit theaters in 1977 like a pair of proton torpedoes down the shaft of the Death Star. It became a geek culture unto itself and forever changed cinema and left its indelible mark on pop culture. But if you didn't already know all that, you're probably listening to the wrong podcast. This is Growing Up Geek, the weekly podcast for geek entertainment and nostalgia. I'm Matt, and I'm joined by my older brother, Brad.
Yo.
And my younger brother, Rob.
May the force be with you.
Nice.
We're going to start by giving you the news that interested us from this last week, and we're going to start with Brad.
Right on. Hulu was announced.
Hulu?
That wasn't an African greeting there. Hulu was announced this week, and if you don't know what that is a streaming video website that is a partnership between NBC and News Corp, and it features television shows and movies, full length, to stream for free. So if you're out there and you have no cable access, and you're one of these people who have just been waiting for on-demand video to go free, it happened on Wednesday. So by all means, check out the site. They have full episodes of a couple hundred shows, it looks like, or at least planned. And then movies, they've got about a dozen.
Is it smooth? Is the resolution good?
Yeah, they have two streams, a 400K one and a 700K one. And what I looked at looked really good. One of the best shows I'd recommend checking out on there is a show called Firefly. And if you've never seen this little show that got completely robbed by Fox, check it out. And by all means, start with the first episode, Serenity, rather than the Train Job, which is what Fox showed first.
Yep.
But,
so you're saying this is a streaming video service that the networks can't get mad about because the networks made it.
That's correct.
Pretty much.
There is a little bit of advertising.
Yeah.
But that is Hulu, and check it out.
Speaking of Firefly and Serenity, it's created by a guy named Joss Whedon, who's done a bit of comic book writing as well, and he's just released issue 1 of Serenity Better Days. It's the second series that he's done in comics for Serenity, and it's definitely worth the read. Check that out. Additionally, in comic book / movie related news, some photos of the costumes from the new Watchmen movie are up online.
Awesome. Yeah. I've just started reading that comic book due to your guys' recommendation. And the one thing I'm wondering about is Rorschach's face pattern constantly seems to change.
It does.
And I'm wondering if they're going to do that or if they're just going to have like a set pattern on his face.
Yeah,
right.
I think that they're going to use CG for his face.
That's awesome.
At least from what I've heard, yeah.
That's just awesome. All right.
Welcome to the future. And as most of you know, Zack Snyder, the director of the 300, is the one at the helms for this. And although I was a little bit nervous at first, these images are very promising, so check them out.
Yeah, definitely will. All right. Pretty cool stuff happening here. You have basically reincarnations of like past favorite things are going on. So first, I want to invite everybody listening to type into their web browser cinematictitanic.com.
So what are we looking at here? I'm seeing some silhouettes.
Here's the deal. If you're a fan of Mystery Science Theater 3000, some of these silhouettes should be familiar.
I see Frank down on the far right.
Next to him is Trace Below.
Mary Jo.
Yeah, Pearl Forrester fame. Next to her is Josh.
Right, the original Tom Servo.
Yeah. And next to him is Joel Hodgson.
Of course.
Basically, Cinematic Titanic is the rebirth of Mystery Science Theater. Okay.
The second rebirth of Mystery Science Theater.
The second rebirth.
Yeah, Mike Nelson has a website called Riff Tracks, but he does that with some of the newer MST guys. This seems to be more like a reuniting of all of the old players.
DVDtalk.com says, there are plenty of reasons to get excited about Cinematic Titanic, but tops of the props has to be the return of Hodgson.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, he's basically the father of MST3K, right?
He is.
He invented it, yeah. He came up with this whole idea of, like, let's just sit in front of a screen and make fun of movies and make a show out of that. Cinematic Titanic has not yet been picked up by any networks or anything, but they just did their first show, and there's a DVD available. Maybe later on I'll be giving you my review of that.
It's safe to say I think it's one of our favorite television shows. I know it's my all-time favorite show.
Absolutely.
Probably agree with that, and that's the news.
Sounds about right, fellas. Thank you. George Lucas was 25 years old when he got the $12 million that he would use to make the first Star Wars film. It took him a while to find anyone that would take him seriously. You've got farm boys meeting wizards and going on grand adventures to rescue princesses. And then we have words that it's left us with indelibly, like Wookiee, lightsaber, the Force. As kids that grew up in the 80s, we pretty much had all three Star Wars available to us around the time that we were starting to watch movies.
As a kid, I remember we would all kind of select who we played as. Matt would play as Luke because he has blonde hair. Right. I think would sometimes be R2-D2 and put a box over myself and kind of wobble back and forth. Brad, I know you tried to be C-3PO because we had the the little C-3PO torso that you put the action figures in.
Yeah.
But the bad part was that wasn't designed to fit around a human.
It wasn't hollow, leaving many scars on my chest.
It's like an Iron Maiden.
Right, exactly.
You go to look like C-3PO, instead you come out looking like Hellraiser.
There you go.
What would you guys say is some of your favorite things about Star Wars?
Lightsabers.
Man, yeah. Is there any cooler weapon?
How many people have ripped that off?
I know. Literally tens. Basically, the Jedi is one of my favorite things about Star Wars.
Absolutely.
It was just this amazing idea of this, super knight who enforces, for good and his powers that he has. But then you have this dark side to it, and that creates the broader moral situations.
Right.
Obviously, Star Wars isn't just that.
There's so much there. It's so rich visually. I guess if I had to pick one, it would be that it is a war in the stars. And I know that seems so obvious, but Lucas is very heavily inspired by World War II. And when you watch those battles, you look at the ships, the technology. He used a lot of World War II footage as placeholders for special effects shots. That stuff it's exciting in the sense of just a war technology sense for me. And you have an incredible villain, similar to a Nazi regime, with a very scary leader who is pressing down, and you have these rebels who are trying to fight back. And to me, that really gets the blood pumping. Matt, how about you?
My favorite thing about Star Wars, one word, 3 syllables, carbonite. In 1999, The Phantom Menace was released. Kind of a strange title once it was announced. Took a bit of getting used to, but then again, so did a name like Obi-Wan Kenobi. After all this time, though, I don't know how much I really have gotten used to The Phantom Menace. There was a point where I realized that the new Star Wars trilogy wasn't probably going to shape up to be all the things that I had hoped it would be and talked about it being and looked forward to it being.
I can remember the moment where I had to realize that Phantom Menace was not a good movie. We had seen the movie, and we were just electrified.
We'd seen it
after that
a bunch of times.
Yeah.
I'd seen it probably 3 or 4 times in the theater.
Right. Ending with that lightsaber fight with Darth Maul, which is easily, to me, the best lightsaber fight in the entire series. Oh, yeah. When that ended, we were just pumped. And when we left, I think we forgot all the Jar Jar things, and we just went home excited. And over time, it started to kind of sink in. And I remember, Matt, you were standing there in the doorway saying, that movie wasn't that good. And I was kind of like, well, what do you mean? It was really good, wasn't it? And I suddenly realized I'm a guy who likes a sucky movie. And I can't be that guy. I can't be as good as any Waterworld fan or something, And so I had to painfully, like a 12-step program, get over the denial, the anger phase, and then finally accept.
I think that, it was painful because we were expecting George Lucas to do no wrong, And you went and saw it, and like you said, there was the pod race, and there's the lightsaber fight. And that stuff is incredible and amazing. Then there's nothing else. Really, it just wasn't exciting, What's the Trade Federation robots?
Right.
They seemed like B-list stormtroopers, It was trying, I think, too hard to imply stormtroopers without actually being stormtroopers. And once you get to that point, I'm like, dude, just make a new type of enemy, fought in a different way. The Jake Lloyd's performance as Anakin Skywalker, he's supposed to be like this slave child, and yet he's filled with baby fat,
You make a point.
Interesting.
He didn't seem like downtrodden.
Yeah.
And as far as the prequels went along, the biggest disappointment was like, where are the Clone Wars? Because that's what, whenever Episode 1 ended, I remember Brad's friend Randy was like, dude, next movie, Clone Wars. It was called Attack of the Clones, but no, it wasn't the Clone Wars. It was this politics and, secret, like, oh yes, I will slowly work my way to defeating the Jedi. And that's not what you want, You want explosions and rebels and...
Gendy Tarkovsky's cartoon Clone Wars series, which we talked up in the last episode, and, is really, at times... better than things that Lucas has done.
Yeah.
In the Clone Wars, you see Yoda smash 2 Star Destroyers together with his hands. That is a Jedi Master. It must be said that Yoda, in my opinion, does not need a lightsaber.
Roger Ebert put it the best when he called it lightsaber porn.
Indeed.
It's just like, here's more lightsabers because people love lightsabers.
Lightsabers wagging around everywhere, and now let's cut to more lightsabers.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That seems like an example of Lucas doing it because he could, because he had animators that were willing. By the time the third movie came out, Revenge of the Sith, my expectations were so low that I was mildly surprised. Still,
right.
It comes off as rushed and incomplete. There's a lot of energy there, but we're at the last chapter. It's too late for a ton of energy to slap it together.
Yeah, I mean, there's in the whole prequels, there's a handful of good scenes, and I guess we can be thankful for that. I certainly think the opera scene between Palpatine and Anakin is as good as anything in the originals. The lightsaber fight between Maul and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, that's great.
I had spent an enormous amount of time before the prequel trilogy came out thinking about how great it's going to be, and now I've spent quite a bit of time since the prequel thinking about how great it could have been.
Yeah, if I had to change some things about I basically have 2 main things, which is humor and threat. The original cast, they love to tease each other. If the audience doesn't have time to make fun of the guy in the monkey suit because they're making fun of him. You know what I mean? None of that came across in the prequels. It was this very dry, childish humor. And then for threat, basically, Episode 4 begins with a door blowing open, Vader comes in, kills everyone, and crushes a dude's neck. This is a threat. Supposedly, audiences, when they saw that in the 70s, were booing him as he came in. You cut to the prequels, and like Rob said, Trade Federation, the most impotent group of guys. You have no idea how these things are scary. They kill no one. You don't even see this supposed catastrophic death toll. And then when the Phantom Menace appears, quote unquote, and you can tell I'm getting excited, but when he appears, he's nothing. He's not doing anything. There's nothing scary about him. He's confusing. Mm-hmm. And so when Maul shows up, it's no surprise that he ends up being the fan favorite because he's actually scary. Unfortunately, he's cut down in the first film. It desperately needed a threat.
Yeah, it's definitely that is the Phantom Menace. That word right there describes one of the large parts what's wrong with the prequel trilogy is that there's not the same villain throughout the entire thing. You have Maul in the first movie, Tyrannus in the second movie, and then Grievous in the third. Lucas needed to figure out a face of evil to have across the thing and who doesn't bite it until the end.
Grievous could have been Darth Maul.
True.
You could have gone for some kind of interesting twist by having Darth Maul coming back in this life support suit, which would be foreshadowing Darth Vader.
But the original films follow a very classic arc of killing off the villain in the third, or redeeming him in the third act. These prequels are a story about a boy who grows up to be a mass murderer. What movie series does that?
There you go. And the threats in the prequel, they're weird and they're forced. You're right. The death toll's catastrophic is simply something that's said. And then Anakin's transformation to bad, he's suddenly willing to wipe out a bunch of children. It's such a strange and instant turn.
Right. Was he expecting that children would watch The Phantom Menace, which he has said was made for kids, and then follow the series all the way up until that guy murders children and be okay with it? Were parents supposed to be okay with taking their kids to see that? I can't imagine that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, it's just an odd... Nobody asked to see Vader's past, and I think the entire idea may be flawed. But, again, I got to take my take my pills and calm down here.
Now, when you talk about, children being possibly one of the main demographics for The Phantom Menace, and Jar Jar being a major indicator of that, it reminds me of some complaints I've heard from older generations talking about how, to them, The Return of the Jedi lets them down because of the Ewoks. So I do recognize there might be some kids who really like Jar Jar.
When the movies came out, I knew a neighborhood kid, and I asked him, do you like Jar Jar? What do you think of him? And he said, he's funny. And I thought, oh, that's fine. That's fine. And and maybe it's the whole Ewok thing all over again.
The young Lucas had $12 million and nothing to lose. The old Lucas, he has tons and tons of money. The prequels were entirely financed by him.
Obviously, like his perspective changed, but he could have just been collapsing under the pressure to make these movies. Everybody was like, give us more Star Wars, give us more Star Wars. He had other directors help him out with Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And I think with the way that people have been, taking Star Wars for themselves and reinventing it, and there's all these different writers, and the universe has grown without Lucas, I think probably his biggest mistake was tackling the prequel movies by himself.
We talked earlier about the fact that the Star Wars universe has expanded since the first 3 films came out.
Yes, the EU, as it's referred to.
There's good books and there's bad books. There's some that you can tell they get Star Wars, and some that you can tell they got a big fat paycheck to write some Star Wars.
My impression I always give of a fake fanfic or like an EU book is like, Luke Skywalker awoke in a cold sweat. His vibrophone was ringing.
Yeah.
The perfect combination of all of Lucas's influences fusing together fantasy and technology, that's a very specific mind that produces that. And these people who do these books, to me, it's not the same universe.
That little short stories about bounty hunters, and you have IG-88 taking over the Death Star.
Oh, God.
Oh, wow.
The Wolfman flies in an X-Wing. That was the lowest point.
The Wolfman flies in an X-Wing. Somebody gets a hold of this character that they love so much that they decide to have this character become the most powerful character in the Star Wars universe.
Very little restraint.
Right, and they're doing it in a space that's so close to the films that it's kind of bumping up against Lucas's fiction. They're not going off and kind of creating a good story on their own. They're just creating a mediocre story and then tagging Star Wars on top of it in order to make it good, And the more they do it, the more Star Wars becomes watered down. The expanded universe did me good whenever Knights of the Old Republic came out. Partly because I'm also a video game enthusiast. Knights of the Old Republic, came out during the prequels, and a lot of people have said, this is better. This has everything Star Wars needs and the prequels lacks. It goes back thousands of years, taking it back enough where they can really play with it without treading on sacred ground.
The highlight for me from the expanded universe was a computer game called Dark Forces, and it came out shortly after Wolfenstein and Doom, and it was a first-person shooter, and I enjoyed playing that, and it also influenced me in a direction towards how are video games made, and then how is computer art made. We've talked about what Star Wars has meant to us. We've talked about where Star Wars has taken us. And now I'd like to talk about where Star Wars is going. Brad, do you have any details?
CG Clone Wars series will be the next thing. After that, there's going to be a live-action television series which supposedly debuts next year. And it's grandiose. I mean, they've got 400 episodes planned. So it's interesting that Star Wars ends in television as opposed to something like Star Trek, which began in television.
Rob, do you know about any upcoming Star Wars-related games or anything like that you're looking forward to?
Well, the big one this year coming out is The Force Unleashed. What I love about this game is that they're kind of going nuts with it. First of all, they're saying, all right, you're on the dark side. And second, they're like, we're going to have this guy be nuts powerful,
right.
And Knights of the Old Republic 3, I hear, is being tossed around. And the way that Knights of the Old Republic 2 ended, I'm so excited for that, possibly. Yeah, I'm keeping my eyes peeled for those.
One of the things that we speculated on quite a bit, I recall, is if you were to ever have children, what order would you show them the Star Wars series in?
If I ever have them, I will show them in the order that I saw it in, because there is no weight in Vader's revelation of "I'm your father." If you watched him grow up as a boy and become Luke's father, one of the best twists in cinematic history, in my opinion. And so I would certainly show them 4, 5, 6, and then only if he wants more, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I'm going to avoid the prequel trilogy as far as my kids are concerned. I think I agree with Brad. Like, I'll show them that, and it is of paramount importance that my child sees Star Wars 4, 5, and 6, you know. It is not so much important that he sees or has to bear the burden of 1, 2, and 3.
Then let me ask, if your kid ends up a Jar Jar lover, are you going to disown him?
Only if he starts talking like that.
Oh, there you go.
I second that emotion.
That's good. I like that. Now, that pretty much wraps up our conversation about Star Wars.
So before we end the show, we like to get a little nostalgic sometimes, and this week I want you guys to answer this with as little thought as possible. This will be our speed round. I'll start with Matt. What is the most violence you've ever committed on one or both of us? Go.
I threw a dart in Brad's leg, but
Indeed he did.
I threw a dart in your leg, but you asked me to do it. So, well,
yes.
To clarify, you asked me to throw the dart while you laid under the dart board, and somehow trusted my accuracy to, Jedi Force-like proportions.
There you go, Rob.
Matt was riding a big wheel, and I wanted on the big wheel, so I decided to negotiate with a tree branch and smacked him dead in the face, crying.
It was quite a bit of blood, as I recall. Matt walked into the house, blood drying on his face, lays on the couch for a nap, and Mom comes in later, and he's like, "Hi, Mom." She's like, "Dear God."
Yeah.
And to end it off, Matt, do you remember there was a Street Fighter showdown that I just have to end this on, which is Matt and I were pretending to be Guile and I don't know whoever else, I guess because he has blonde hair. And I remember, Matt, you did a fake flash kick, which is basically you put your knee into my face directly, and blood instantly started gushing from my nose. And I remember that we were both kind of angry at the time, like it was kind of like a brawl. And you looked up at me, not necessarily wanting to leave your anger, but realizing that, hey, it's blood gushing out. And I remember your line was, "Why is your nose bleeding?" So
it's because I knew that it meant trouble for all of us.
Right?
It was just like, dang it. I do remember actually. We had the 8-bit Nintendo, and we had Indiana Jones, and Rob was at one of the last levels. And it was one of those games where if you lose, you got to start the game from the beginning.
Right.
And we're all very excited. I'm on my knees. Brad's jumping in the air, and Rob loses. Brad grabs my head, just joking around, grabs my head and slams it off his knee.
Oh,
he didn't mean to make contact.
Yeah.
But my nose started gushing blood then too.
There you go. So our careers as ninjas were short-lived, obviously.
Yeah. That wraps up this week's episode, folks. If you want to send us some of your thoughts about the Star Wars series, or where it went wrong, or what it did right, or if you'd like to share some nostalgia with us, you can email us at mail@growing-up-geek.com. Or send us a droid with a hidden message letting us know that we're your only hope.
Indeed.
Until next time, this is Matt.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Brad.
We'll see you later, folks.